Welcome to Project Revelation.
The age of the Earth might be one of the most heated debates of all time.
They really believe the Earth is 6,000 years old. They are really wrong about that.
What does the Bible really say about the age of the Earth? Does it really say it's only 6,000 years old? And what about the myths of Atlantis that seem to echo Genesis 6? There are some fringe historians that have theories about advanced ancient civilizations and how their world came to an end. As we dig further into the Bible, we will uncover some possibilities that might challenge your mainstream Christian beliefs. And I have Gary Wayne here to help me weigh in on this important topic.
Because of the angelic rebellion, which then gets corrupted again by the fallen angels, and then you have the creation of Adam to be the resolution to the angelic rebellion.
If God did indeed create Adam to deal with the fallen angels of Genesis 6, then our purpose here on this planet goes deeper than we could ever imagine. When it comes to the age of the Earth, I never really gave this much thought. And before I was a Christian, I probably would have just sided with whatever the scientific community was saying at that time. But now that I'm a Christian, should I just agree with what mainstream Christianity is teaching? I've heard the arguments for a 6,000-year-old Earth, but to me, it doesn't add up. Especially when you look closely at the story of Cain and Abel.
You know, one of the things that a lot of people ask is if the world is only 6,000 years old and Adam and Eve were the first human beings, then how does Cain, after only Cain and Abel being born, get exiled and ostracized and require a mark for protection, and then finds a wife immediately in a place that's called Nod, which is indicating the civilization, and builds a city for his wife when there's supposed to be nobody else there, that you don't need a city, and calls it after his first son, Enoch, or Hanok, as some of the transliterations go. And if you look at that at face value, this happens very, very quickly afterwards, like within 20 or 40 years. So he's obviously not looking for protection from generations down the road, although that may come into effect, but he's afraid in the moment. And so he's looking for protection and receives that mark, and then he finds people, and none of that lines up with the standard sort of chronology or doctrine in Christianity. And I don't believe the Bible contradicts itself. So I believe the answers are in the Bible. I also don't necessarily accept the standard dogma at times, because it doesn't make any sense if the standard dogma is in conflict, and then that allows the adversaries to throw wedges into Christianity and create doubt. And so I always dig deeper in, and that's what I find is the answer is always deeper and found within the Bible if you actually find it. So I would indicate that Adam and Eve perhaps are not the first creation of humankind. That we get within the Eden account so many differences between the day 6 account that you are left with two possible options. One is the Bible is in contradiction, or there's a separate creation first in day 6 followed by this day 7, followed by, we don't know how long, but sometime after day 7, the creation of Adam in Eden. And if you start sort of there and then start to look at the details, then you start to say, hey, there's more going on here than just the one creation.
I would rather let the Bible say what the Bible says, especially in context of the greater story of the human race and our relationship with God, and then our relationship with God through Jesus Christ. So let me digress for just a second here and tell you about this movie that came out in 2010. It's called The Genesis Code. This movie is about two college students that can't agree on the age of the Earth. About halfway through the movie, they eloquently present an interesting hypothesis about how the story of creation could actually fit into what modern day scientists are teaching about the Earth being 4.54 billion years old and the universe being about 16 billion years old. They stand on the premise that each day represents an entire age of roughly 1 billion years. This movie is worth the watch if you're a Christian. The argument they make is very compelling, especially when they refer to time and duration and the effect that consciousness has on time. At the end of the day, I don't agree with this hypothesis, but I think it's very interesting. But what does the Bible say? Do we get a literal day as defined by the Bible and not defined by man?
When we look at the days of creation, we do get a literal day. One of the things we really want to keep in mind when we're looking at the English translation and trying to take it back to Hebrew in the Old Testament or Greek in the New Testament to verify the translation is we run into this concept there in sort of not a problem, but just that we need to understand it properly, that each of those original Hebrew words and Greek words can have multiple meanings. So we want to make sure that the meaning that is selected not only fits with the narrative that it's in and the sentence that it is in, and that translation doesn't contradict other passages in the Bible. So it's a high standard. But I think if you try and do that, you can get there. So we can have either a day of creation or as a day as 1,000 years, as it's talked about in the Bible, because a day is like 1,000 years, as we're told in the New Testament with God. So with that sort of understanding, if it was 1,000 years, you would have a gap between day 6 and day 7 of 1,000 years. And then however long when Adam and Eve are created thereafter. So you could have a small gap in there of thousands of years. And the lineage of the 6,000 years derives from the genealogies of Adam as the ages of the patriarchs are listed, and you total that up, it comes up to about 6,000 years. So, but that's only telling us that the time frame between Adam and us is about 6,000 years, nothing more. Doesn't speak to the idea and notion of the age of the earth, except that it's sort of overlaid onto that concept of a 6,000-year-old earth based on standard sort of doctrine. But again, if you look at the understanding that there's differences in the creations, you'll have even a further gap between day 6 and Eden. So for example, Adam is created in singular. Day 6 people are created in plural. And they're told to multiply and settle the earth. But Adam is put into Eden. And sometime later, Eve is created. Not at the same time, male and female, in plural, as they're created in day 6, but from Adam's rib. Adam has the Spirit of God breathed into him for a special commission, not documented in day 6. There's a different order of creation and details throughout the Eden account, which suggests either the Bible is in contradiction or it's two different creations, and I do not accept that the Bible is in contradiction. And it's not just adding more details because they're two different. Adding adds more information, it doesn't contradict. So when we look at how that affects how we understand the age of the earth is we get another small gap of perhaps a couple thousand years. But that doesn't begin to tell the story as to, is the world even older than that? But what it does to begin to teach us is, let us look at the meanings of the words and try and establish what was really trying to be said in God's word that's provided for us. And we know that Adam is the same species as the people of day 6, because man in day 6 is Adam. Just as man and Adam becomes the name for the man that's created in day 6. So we're not saying that these are different types of beings like Neanderthals or people like that in day 6, just that possibly and most likely you have at least 3 races created in plural in day 6. And Adam could be of one of those 3 or 4 races, or an additional race that's added to, let's say, 3 in day 6. So we need to take a step back and say we can't stand on the pedestal that the world is 6,000 years old just based on the lineage. We could only say the period between Adam and now is about 6,000 years. The concept of God creating Adam for a special commission with the Spirit being breathed into him is loaded with information that's part of the greater context of the Bible. And if you consider that you have an angelic creation, and we know angels are created from before the creation of the world, as they're listed in that order in Psalms 104, you have an angelic rebellion that takes place sometime after creation, however many times that may have been, or how old the earth is, and wherever you want to place it, there's a rebellion. And the creation of the Adamites is the resolution to the angelic rebellion. And so the 6,000 years that have been played out since have placed fallen angels against humankind so that they prevent us from being raised up after the resurrection like angels, to be like angels, and to even judge those angels for those crimes against humanity that they've done without explanation, or a lot of explanation in the Bible, for the last 6,000 years.
I had an interesting synchronicity occur while reading Gary's book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy. I was reading the section in his book on Atlantis, and then by chance I came across this podcast by a gentleman named Randall Carlson. Now, Mr. Carlson is not a Christian and seems to take some jabs at young earthers and Christians in general. But Randall talks a lot about Atlantis and how he believes that Plato was recording history, not just making up some fairy tale. He also believes in something ironically called Younger Dryas Impact Hypothesis. This hypothesis posits that fragments of a large, now more than 4 kilometers in diameter, disintegrating asteroid or comet struck North America, South America, Europe, and Western Asia around 12,850 years ago, coinciding with the beginning of the Younger Dryas cooling event. Now, the time frames match up perfectly with the catastrophic event that ended Atlantis and all other alleged civilizations. So let's take a closer look at the legend of Atlantis.
Atlantis is an antediluvian island, mentioned in an allegory on the hubris of nations in Plato's works, Timaeus and Critias, wherein it represents the antagonist naval power that besieges ancient Athens, the pseudo-historic embodiment of Plato's ideal state in the Republic. In the story, Athens repels the Atlantean attack unlike any other nation of the known world, supposedly bearing witness to the superiority of Plato's concept of a state. The story concludes with Atlantis falling out of favor with the deities and submerging into the Atlantic Ocean. The only primary sources for Atlantis are Plato's dialogues between Timaeus and Critias. All other mentions of the island are based on them. The dialogues claim to quote Solon, who visited Egypt between 590 and 580 BC. They state that he translated Egyptian records of Atlantis. Written in 360 BC, Plato introduced Atlantis in Timaeus, saying the following: "For it is related in our records how once upon a time your state stayed the course of a mighty host, which, starting from a distant point in the Atlantic Ocean, was insolently advancing to attack the whole of Europe, and Asia to boot. For the ocean there was at that time navigable, for in front of the mouth which you Greeks call, as you say, the Pillars of Heracles, there lay an island which was larger than Libya and Asia together, and it was possible for the travelers of that time to cross from it to the other islands, and from the islands to the whole of the continent over against them which encompasses that veritable ocean. For all that we have here, lying within the mouth of which we speak, is evidently a haven having a narrow entrance, but that yonder is a real ocean, and the land surrounding it may most rightly be called, in the fullest and truest sense, a continent. Now in this island of Atlantis there existed a confederation of kings, of great and marvelous power, which held sway over all the island, and over many other islands also in parts of the continent. According to Critias, the Hellenic deities of old divided the land so that each deity might have their own lot. Poseidon was appropriately, and to his liking, bequeathed the island of Atlantis. In this story Poseidon fell in love with Cleito, the daughter of Evenor and Leucippe, who bore him 5 pairs of male twins. The eldest of these, Atlas, was made rightful king of the entire island and the ocean, called the Atlantic Ocean in his honor, and was given the mountain of his birth and the surrounding area as his fiefdom. Atlas's twin Gadeirus, or Eumelus in Greek, was given the extremity of the island toward the Pillars of Hercules. The other 4 pairs of twins were also given rule over many men, and a large territory.
The mythology of Atlantis has so many parallels with the Genesis 6 story and the end-time beast kingdom. Let me submit a few to you. Atlantis tells the story of Poseidon, who is a god or fallen angel, falling in love with a human woman. They then bear 5 sets of twins. These 10 demigods or Nephilim rule the kingdom of Atlantis. And Genesis 6 tells us the story of the sons of God going into women to create Nephilim. In addition to that, the end-time beast empire consists of one Antichrist who has 10 kings that give over their kingdoms. Atlantis is said to have been destroyed in a huge flood. God judged the antediluvian world because of this very thing. And one can say that this is all a myth, especially because the Bible doesn't refer to Atlantis. Or does it? Let's look at Isaiah 23. Who planned this against Tyre, the bestower of crowns, whose merchants are princes, whose traders are renowned in the earth? The Lord Almighty planned it to bring down her pride in all her splendor and to humble all who are renowned on the earth.
Isaiah 23 is one of those very interesting passages that sort of fits in with that dual prophecy sort of aspect that I like to talk about. And it has overtones not only for the end time, but for prehistory, and sort of particularly a mythos in polytheism called Atlantis. And Atlantis is a Genesis 6 story. It has the gods or the fallen angels going to, in particular, Poseidon as being the king of Atlantis, going to Cleito to produce 10 demigod kings. Just as you have the sons of God in Genesis 6:4 going to human females to create the Nephilim, demigods. Demigod in the ancient meaning means the offspring of a god and a human female. So it's the same story. We get polytheism looking through their polytheist lens, recounting the same story over and over and over and over. But the Atlantis one is just so important, I think, because it's used by secular society and polytheism today. And I think we get overtones in the Bible from it, and beginning with Isaiah 23. So this is an island that is destroyed. Well, Tyre wasn't an island. It had maybe a peninsula that was built on, but this is an island that's destroyed by the waters. right? This is and it's not that the king of Syria isn't going to come in and destroy Tyre, but he doesn't destroy it in this manner, right? And just as you have the king of Babylon that's going to come later and going to probably do some destruction on Tyre as well, and he does, but he doesn't destroy it in this manner. And this is the old city, which is language that's used in the Bible as it translates into English that goes back to a former age. And this is the location where all those proud and renowned ones are located. This is just, it is burgeoning with details that this is talking about a destruction of a city center of a, let's say, beast empire of the antediluvian world. And typically I don't include Tyre as one of the beast empires of the post-diluvian period in prophecies, because it really isn't, except that Tyre is included in some of the allegories like Ezekiel 28. We look at Atlantis as being part of the world empire before the flood, reigned over by Nephilim. And that's the same type of organizational structure we ought to look at for the end time, with those same 10 kings, those 10 Rephaim or Nephilim kings or bloodline kings. You start to see that sort of connection. And so when we look at Atlantis, not only was it the center of the world that it was trying to be, it didn't quite get there. The flood came before and they lost to the Greeks in part of the wars. And you have it as being a religious center, and you have it as a merchant center. And then Tyre comes along after the flood as kind of a linking sort of allegory, because it's like this empire of Phoenicians and Canaanites. And it is a merchant class empire, but not a world empire in terms of, let's say, territory and governorship like a Rome or an Egypt or something like that. And so it's part of the allegory that we need to understand end time Babylon. So Babylon will be an end time religion. It will be a city, as it's said to be 9 times, and it will be a place where the world grows rich, because it will control all of the monetary and business sort of levers, and I think all transactions will go through it. And Nineveh would be another allegory for this end time city, because it's the city of blood and the city of Assyria, again, from a beast empire. And so when I look at Isaiah 23, I see that linking past, present, and future, where Antichrist will try and raise his empire up to heaven, just as Satan did. And before he comes to power, this Babylon city will be in place, but then he'll destroy Babylon in Revelation 17 and Jeremiah 51, and replace it with Jerusalem, where he crowns himself, and will raise that up to be like the last 3.5 year city before Armageddon. And the 10 kings hand their power over to him in Revelation 17, because they're jealous of the wealth and power who controls them as the world government. The 10 kings of the groups of nations, spheres of influence that we're hearing so much about now, starting to form together, that they're going to hand their power over to Antichrist to destroy Babylon, which happens, and as described in Revelation 18. And then he creates a religion not known by the fathers or the people before. And it's going to be a religion that raises him to be like God, as described in 2 Thessalonians 2, and where Satan will also be worshipped. Because remember, taking the mark isn't the only thing that causes you to burn in the lake of fire, but also worshiping Antichrist and or Satan in the last 3.5 years are equivalent, as it's detailed. So yes, it's a complete transition into a religion that hasn't dominated the beast empires, at least until before the flood. And I think what happens is we get that original Enochian mysticism that is going to be, and that's Enoch, son of Cain, as opposed to from the Sethian line, that is going to be reimposed, but it's going to have Antichrist at the top as the Messiah and Satan as the God.
Daniel 11 tells the very specific story of the Antichrist. Let's start at verse 37. He shall regard neither the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall exalt himself above them all. But in their place he shall honor a God of fortresses, a God which his fathers did not know he shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and precious things. So what Gary and I are submitting to you is once the one world religion is set up, then Antichrist will come in and destroy that religion and claim that Satan is at the top of the pantheon of the gods and he is the Messiah. This would mirror what Jesus has done. One possibility that I see is that the one world religion will be based on the premise that God is the force of nature and evolution, not a personal being. Sometime in the future, you will be required to forsake every other god because it's dangerous to humankind, especially Christianity, because it's not quote unquote all-inclusive, which is totally false. So you know how it seems like we are being prepared for alien disclosure? Well, what if a day came and we were told that we were the product of an ancient alien race seeding us here on this earth, and that our creators wanted to help us? Although this sounds really crazy, it fits right into Revelation 13, starting at verse 5. And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and all those who dwell in heaven. Now, as we know, the unforgivable and worst blasphemy you could ever do is against Holy Spirit. What if the false prophet and the Antichrist had false proof that the Virgin Mary was seated by a fallen angel or alien rather than the Holy Spirit, and that we just didn't understand the religion of the Jews until now? Then the Antichrist would destroy the one world religion and introduced a satanic pantheon. So in light of an angelic rebellion, we know that happened, but one thing that we don't necessarily get is the when did that happen.
When I look at the gap theory that's thrown out there, I came at it from a Christian contrarian perspective. Is I want to verify one way or the other because I don't understand what the gap is. I've been taught this from when I was a child about a sixth day, but then when I start thinking about the churches have been infiltrated at the cemetery schools, that they're not teaching proper prehistory and they're not teaching prophecy. Do we have it right? Because it's important to understand. I don't think it makes a difference on your faith. It ought not to, because I think everything is perfectly consistent in the Bible. But perhaps if there was a gap between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, that would be the best place for the angelic rebellion and the cause of that destruction that is talked about in the gap theory that destroyed the earth. So let me explain a little bit on how I get there so that people have a better understanding and may want to look a little bit deeper into this. So when we look at the English translation, we need to look at the words that come out of Hebrew because they have more than one meaning. And did they use the right meaning and the right application, and how does that fit with the rest of the Bible? And we also need to look at words that are inserted by the translators to try and make sense of what was coming out of Greek and Hebrew. And in Genesis 1:1, you have, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth, right? And then it says, and the earth was without form and void, and darkness, was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And you have that word "and" that's inserted all throughout the Genesis 1 account. There's not a Hebrew word there. But "and" is put in there. I don't know whether or not it's because it just sort of fits grammatically, or it's there for a pause, that something happened in that sort of space. And as you go into the days 6, and then it says "and," so like there's a space there, right? Which is kind of implied by the days. And I think they've used that sort of throughout. So that's kind of where the word "gap" sort of comes from. And some translations don't use the word "and" in every location. They use the word "now." As in, now the earth was form and void. And that's because when you go through the translations, you could translate it as the word "became," the Hebrew word "haya," as being "became." So "haya" can mean to exist, to come to pass, or to come into being. So a lot hinges on, did it come into being or did it exist from that instant sort of creation? And then when you look at form and void, that it either was or became formless and a void, that form word is "tuhu," which can mean desolation, a desert, chaos, and worthless, and comes up also in Isaiah 45 for the word "vain," as being a "tuhu," and God did not create everything in vain and to be lived in. So he wouldn't create anything that was without form. So that means something might have happened to it, and then it became void. And void is the word "buhu," which means ruin, waste, empty, vacuous, and or void. And so you get these words that are suggesting that the world may have become void. And then we have a strange passage in 2 Peter that suggests something that really relates to what happens in the 6 days. And in 2 Peter 3:4-5, it talks about the heavens of old, at a time when the earth was standing out of water and in water, and whereby the earth was overflowed with water and perished. Well, people most of the time think that's the flood, but the whole world didn't perish then, just what was on the land. So if you understand what happens in the creation of the world in days 1 through 6, there's a separation of the waters to create the firmament, right? And if there was a destruction before, that's when the water overflowed and it would have killed the earth that was before. And so when you have this descriptions that seem to suggest a destruction, it starts to make some sense. So now when you overlay Psalms 104, which is another telling of the creation, and you have the angels that are created before, just as Job 38 talks about angels being created before the physical world is created. And in verse 5, it says that the foundations of the earth were laid never to be destroyed. And you have this possible destruction where the earth, as it's talked about in the book of Job, as the foundations being laid, but there's this destruction in the former age that may have destroyed the earth, not completely, but down to its foundations, because they're the ones that can never be destroyed. And then the earth is covered with water and over the deep. And in verse 30, this is the key, I think, is that the earth is renewed when God sends his Spirit, just as in Genesis 1:2, and the Spirit was over the earth, and that's when the days of creation get started. Now, most people will say, okay, what about Exodus 20 on the 6 days of creation that God created the heaven and the earth, right? Well, it doesn't really get the word creation, it's made, it's a different word. And as in form, as opposed to creating out of nothing, which is the word that's used in Hebrew in the book of Genesis. But the key is what's the definition of heaven? And heaven is the Hebrew word shama, which can mean the heavenly dwelling of God. It can mean the space between the firmament and the rest of the universe, or it can mean the space under the firmament. So you have to apply it in the right word. So in days 1 through 6, it actually calls the firmament heaven that's created. And so if you're into a renewal of the earth, as Psalms 104 tends to suggest, then you have this world that would have been destroyed to its foundations in the angelic rebellion, but God is going to start it anew. He's going to send his spirit. He's going to renew the earth and recreate the firmament by separating that water crashed down to the earth apart again, which creates the firmament. And everything in the firmament includes the sun inwards, and everything outside is beyond that, so that you can start to have the creation process of the rest of days, of the days of the week that created the earth. And so there's a good argument that you could translate that differently, and it would not be out of contradiction with the rest of the Bible. And in fact, the word in the beginning is resith. It means the origin of the world. And in Genesis, or in 2 Peter, it's the word arche, that's in the beginning, which means at the beginning or the first time. And so all of it sort of indicates that there may have been a renewal of the earth because of the angelic rebellion, which then gets corrupted again by the fallen angels, and then you have the creation of Adam to be the resolution to the angelic rebellion.
Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 17 says, God is the God of gods. And looking at the Hebrew word used for God, it's Elohim. He is the Elohim of Elohims. All throughout the Bible, we see a battle between the created spiritual beings known as the Elohim and God, who is Yahweh, who is the Elohim of Elohims. The battle is fought over us, the human race. No matter how old or young the earth actually is, the overarching story in the Bible is beautiful, and our purpose as a Christian is so important. We live in a world where deception is so grand and so widespread, but we have the truth at our fingertips whenever we want it, and we can deliver it to our sphere of influence. According to Luke 10:18, Jesus left us here with power and authority. He demonstrated what our Christian walk and relationship with God should look like. And according to 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 3, humans will one day judge the fallen angels for their sin against creation. And no matter how deep or shallow your knowledge goes, we are to bring truth and love to a lost and dying world. So it is my hope that if you've come across this video, that you will consider being a subscriber, because we've got a lot of good content that is going to come in the future. So I really hope you enjoyed this video. Until next time, go forth and bear some fruit.